fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Faith for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Shaloha and welcome everyone. If you can hear me, I'm so glad to see all of you today. Welcome everyone to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during the live chat last month that Gary will be answering today. And if you have any for him to answer today, please put them in all caps in the chat here on YouTube so I can see them and I will take note of them today here on YouTube. Thank you to our awesome and friendly moderator, Tammy George, for helping us out. And for all of you participating, Brother Gary, how are you doing today?
I am doing pretty well and happy to be back with you for our second show. I'm not sure how many I've done total on AMA, but it's been quite a few. So yeah, I had a very, very good Christmas and a good New Year, and looking forward to this year as the year unfolds. And I think it's going to be one of those eventful years, just my gut feeling.
Awesome. What kind of things do you guys do in Canada for New Year's? I'm just curious because it's really crazy here in Hawaii. It's like a bigger deal than like the 4th of July as far as fireworks and all kinds of craziness.
Yeah, I would say for, things like fireworks, it's, I would say more popular in Canada than Dominion Day.
Okay.
And I would say it's one of those let loose days that particularly when you're young, you tend to really overdo it. I know I did when I was young. Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting sort of days that sort of starts off a new year with expectations of a coming year and thoughts of the last year, and it's just sort of that threshold point that I think just sort of gets people wanting to get together and having some fun. Just should keep it within norms. Not that I'm a good role model when I was young on that, but in hindsight, I think a lot of times it should have been a little less party. But it's a good time of year, I think.
Yeah, I was not the greatest role model either when I was younger around this time of year, but for sure it's fun to see the younger generation enjoying themselves. And also too, in the chat, Zen put in there, this is your 54th show here, Gary. Can you believe that?
Yeah, that's getting to be up there when you consider that's once a month. So that's quite a few months.
And I've been watching you on here for years, and so it's amazing the amount of questions and the diverse questions that people come up with. I mean, I was expecting to see similar questions over and over, but I mean, I guess we do get some of that, right? But still, there's very unique questions coming up today. And I'd like to see if you have any updates for your new book that you'd like to share, along with your contact information, and how do the listeners reach you and buy your books?
So update for the new book for Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps to Define End Time Prophecy, is still available for pre-order. The printing copies are not yet done. The book did get through the queue to the printers at the end of November, so it's been at the printers for over a month now. I am expecting, delivery of books hopefully in January, and should beat the release date, the official release date of March 12th by, a couple of months. At least that's the hope at this point, and I'm waiting for a confirmation on that. I have a call that I put into the publisher today, so as soon as I have my books, I will fill all of the pre-orders, and as we get closer to the print date, there'll be a link up there on Amazon for the Kindle version as well as on my website as well. So if you're looking to purchase either Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 1 or Part 2, the best and easiest, quickest way to find out about the book and to order the book, if that's your choice, is to go to my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on the website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1. And it's just a drop in the bucket as to how much information is in the book. So I don't think you've read the whole book. It's just to give you a flavor, even though it's a generous excerpt. And the same goes for the shorter book, book 2, which is only 84 chapters and also with a generous excerpt to again give you a good feel for the type of content that's going to be in the book. And if you're looking to want to buy book 1, then you go to buy now, book 1, go to the buy page, and you have several options there for you. If you're in Canada, there's a Canada page. If you're in the US, there's a US page. Anywhere else in the world, there's an international page. And on that, you can choose to buy one book or multiple books. And there's a discount now for buying multiple books. I don't have the 2 books linked yet, but if you're wanting to buy multiple books, I'll have a notification up soon and or a link. I'm hoping that they can find a way to do the shopping cart on this. But if you're wanting to get multiple books and it includes copies of each, just order one of the books, send me an email on the contact the author or genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. I'll and order the quantity of the books that you want under one of the 2 books. Tell me how you want that split so you get the discount and you get the books that you want and how you want it signed. So I'm hoping to make that easier. It's been a technological problem, but one way or the other, we'll have that solved for January 1. You can also link over from the website for book 1 to get the Kindle edition. There's a link for that. There's a link over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.ca, and amazon.com. If you wanted to pre-order the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, again, go to Buy Now, click on Book 2. You'll see a similar kind of page, but just make sure you're on the right page, and it's the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. There's a new book cover that will be up on my book, on my website as soon as the website guy gets the changes that we've been asking. There's been a cover change, and you'll see a different color that's on the website than what's on Amazon, and I'm not sure all the online bookstores have got the switch over either. It's the same book. It's just going to have that color with more of the reds and the whites in it, and the gold's going to be gone to differentiate it. So you can go there, you can pre-order again. And it's got a discount for quantities. And again, if you wanted to mix and match the books, just send me an email in the meantime, but order the number of books and you'll get that discount. And then I'll send you the books that you're asking for, whatever that mix is, until we get that linked. And again, there's a link to barnesandnoble.com. There's a link to amazon.com and amazon.ca. And yes, I do personally sign every book. And so if you wanted it addressed to individuals, there's a space there on those order sites to say who you want it signed to. And if you want a separate inscription than my standard one, just tell me how you would like it signed and send me an email on that as well. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And if I happen to I have a document on something and you wanted to get a hold of me, just go to the contact author. That was genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. But that, where you contact the author, that's that email. And it may take me 3 weeks to get back to you, but I will get back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary, all that information. I also noted in the chat, Sherry brought up that we both sound better this month. Is your health pretty stable now? Because thank God my sore throat is gone.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I'm 100% yet. My voice sort of comes and goes a little bit. I've still got a cough. My energy's not quite 100%. But I'm way better than I was a month ago, and I can't even do the extrapolation on the calculation how much better when I got COVID in about the first week of November. I think actually I was getting it. It was just sort of setting on in the November show because I felt like I had a cold or a sniffle, and I thought I might be just tired, but it developed into COVID by the Friday. So.
Wow, it's good, so good to hear that your voice is getting better, and we'll continue to keep you in our prayers for full recovery so that you feel back to 100%. That's good to hear, Gary. Okay, so should we get started on the questions? Looks like we have some good ones this time. My apologies for last time. That we were having some technical issues in the last 10 minutes or so of the show. And so the last question, Gary, I sent you a message about this one. The last question that you answered from Daniel Sullivan was very difficult to hear your amazing answer to that. So I would like to start with that one if it's okay. And
Sure.
I can ask you that here again. Daniel, it says, please connect the covenant with death and agreement with Sheol of Isaiah 28 to the covenant with many of Daniel 9. Is it a deal with the devil and the angel of the bottomless pit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so not only do you have the importance of those passages, but sort of some of that underlying sort of meaning. So when you're dealing with the pit prison, and you're dealing with Hades and Sheol, you're dealing with the fallen angels, and you're dealing with the ultimate sort of consequences that are going to end up with the lake of fire for the fallen angels and those who are going to take, the mark of the beast. And so this is technically not a deal with the devil at that point in time. What it is the covenant in Daniel 9:27, where and it doesn't say it's the Antichrist there, but where he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And then in the middle of that week, he's going to take the sacrifice away, and he's going to commit the abomination and start the last 3.5 years and his reign, where he will cement that covenant that this individual is going to negotiate into a covenant of punishment forever versus a covenant of death. So at this point in time, people who will be jumping into the New World Order, and with this Babylon dominated 10 king 7th empire, this is not the covenant of death. This is leading up to it. This is what makes the way for Antichrist to come about. So you can look at it from Antichrist, who's going to have all of the authority of Satan, as 2 Thessalonians 2:4 talks about, or 2 Thessalonians 2, and I think it's about probably verse 8 or 9. And as Revelation 12 will talk about, is that he has the authority that's provided to him, and Satan's going to provide him all of his power as well. So I would say that Antichrist is doing it with the authority of Satan, just as when you have the mark of the beast, you'll be worshiping the beast and you'll be worshiping Antichrist, as Revelation tells us, and takes the time to denote that, taking the mark or worshiping Antichrist or worshiping Satan gets you the same consequences in the last 3.5 years. So it is a covenant with that. It's leading up to that covenant. And I kind of like to put all things around what Jesus said in terms of my approach. And I would advise everybody to do that if you want to take rid of the conflicts, and if you want to have all of the pieces fit, And if you want to really kind of understand the chronology and timing of events, just simplifies everything, and you'll start to see things that you never saw before if you go that route. So Jesus references in his chronological order of events. And we know it's a chronological order of events because he's using, as it's translated into English, the word then. That's the when. That's the order of events of when it's happening. And that's not inserted by the translators, and it's not mistranslated by the translators. It is the Greek word tota, and it means exactly that. It is the when. And so he gives us a chronological order, and he also tells us that all of the events in that fig tree generation will be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but not his word. And so all of those events will happen exactly how he talks about. And beginning in Matthew 24:15, Jesus is going to reference this passage and other passages that Daniel is talking about. So in Matthew 24:15, this is the time of the abomination of the desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet. And so he's guiding us to go back to understand those prophecies. And the abomination is the midpoint of that covenant made in 927. And this is a time when Judea is going to flee to the mountains and be protected. And it's a very tumultuous point in time for the people of Judea and the lost tribes of Israel who will have been awakened at that point in time. And I'm going to come back to that. But I just like to utilize the template of Matthew 24, and I also put Mark 13, Luke 17 and 21 around the Matthew template. And what I do with that, I use the Matthew template and then add in the extra details that the other two accounts provide. And it really gives you a sense of chronology. So we have a reference in Revelation 12 to when Judea flees as well. That's exactly at the same time. And that's in Revelation 12, where Judah is fleeing to the wilderness. And this is done in a second Exodus time of terminology. So that's Revelation 12:6 when they flee, 12:14 as they're taken on the wings of the eagle, which is the same language that's used in the Exodus, in the first Exodus. And so it's marking 3.5 years of protection from what has just happened. And this is the time of the war in heaven. This is at the midpoint. This is at the time of the abomination that he's referencing in Daniel 24. And for people who don't think that you can match up the chronology in Revelation, of course you can, because Revelation 1 tells us that this is the testimony of Jesus Christ given to the angel to give to John to write down and deliver to the angel, to the 7 churches. So it has to fit. This is Jesus' testimony. And we need to understand that when we're trying to figure out the chronology. And I'm not going to go into Revelation chronology. I just want to have people have an understanding, if they've not heard me before, in terms of my approach and how you can work the chronology. So what Daniel, as in the person asking the question, was asking as to the book of Daniel that I was talking about, he's referencing a time of when this covenant of death that's going to be annulled. And that's in Isaiah 28:15 and 18. That gives us a very interesting passage that goes along with that covenant of death. And this is the covenant that's referenced in Daniel 9 that is being annulled. And it's got some extraordinary details for people if they look at it in terms of how we match up prophecy from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and how the chronology fits. So this is covenant of death is annulled when an overflowing scourge comes along. And Isaiah 28 8:14 also talks about this as being to a scornful people who live in Jerusalem. So we get a marker of this scourge and this annulment of this covenant that Jesus is referencing. And then in Isaiah 27, you have on the scourge that is overflowing. It's like a river. It's like rowing and anything to do with water, and it's a judgment as well. And Isaiah 27, the chapter just before, is talking about a time when the Leviathan in the end time is going to be slain, just as the end time empire in one portion of the allegory is a Leviathan multi-headed dragon coming up out of the sea. And so we get a chronological time in Isaiah 27 as it links in as well. And in 27:12 it says, in that day a river, and river, when it's translated into English that way from the Hebrew word nahar, is either the Euphrates or the Nile. So typically it's going to be the Euphrates, because usually the Nile is typically listed when you have that sort of Hebrew word. And this is a time when a river, the Euphrates, and the river of this is the river of the Euphrates, when Jehovah, God, pre-existent Jesus, will beat off the channel of this river. This is a time, as you get into verse 13, that this comes at a time at the great trumpet. The last trumpet and the days of the trumpet are happening at the midpoint and overlap a little bit into the last 3.5 years. And so you have a connection of the time frame of the trumpet, and you have the midpoint and a time of the annulling, where Israel is going to be gathered one by one. And it's indicating a time of exodus that's going to work hand in hand to the protection that Judea was provided for 3.5 years. So as we look at all of this sort of in its context, we get some other passages that point to the same time frame, and this is understood as the time of trouble in the Old Testament. So in Daniel 12, you get when Michael rises, and when you're going to have a judgment and a resurrection of the dead. This is not talking about the church. This is about Israel. This is Ezekiel 37 that's being referenced there. And along with that, after the resurrection of the dry bones, you move into the teens in Ezekiel 37, and you're getting into the second Exodus, where Israel and Judah are going to be unified under one king, David, and done by Jehovah, the pre-existent Jesus, or as we understand it in Christianity, when Jesus comes for one of his days of his visitation, or the days of his coming, as Luke talks about. First one was days of visitation, is Hosea 9:7. And so this is also cognate to the passage of Jeremiah 37, the time of Jacob's trouble. And trouble there is the same word in Hebrew as in trouble in Daniel 12:1, where this is the midpoint of the 7 years. And we know that in Daniel 12 because it tells us it's the time of the abomination and how much time is still yet to run. And it's about 3.5 years. It presents it in a couple of different ways there. And so this is the time of Sarah, T-S-A-R-A-H, as it's spelled in Hebrew, as we understand it with the English letters. And it means a time of persecution, time of tribulation, a time that is unlike any other time. But Israel will be saved out of this, as well as Judah. And this is the time of the second Exodus that is being talked about in Daniel 12 and Jeremiah 37. And also in Jeremiah 30, it's talking about Jehovah and David that are going to lead this. just as Ezekiel 37 does. So you see how the Bible supports itself in the details if you let it. And you have, in my approach, I keep prophecies for Israel separate from prophecies for Judah, and prophecies for specific tribes separate to those specific tribes, and separate for all of those from the church, just so that people can follow how I'm getting to where I'm going. And that sort of intersects in Micah 5 and Micah 2, where the breaker and the king will pass before Israel in the time of second Exodus, in the time of the Assyrian that is in the land. The time, and the Assyrian is the Antichrist, an allegory for the Antichrist, as one of the allegories for Antichrist. And this is the one who had negotiated that covenant. So you see all of this coming together in supporting a mid to just after Jesus comes for rapture, then he comes for a second Exodus to prepare Israel to be made ready as a bride for the covenant, or for not for the covenant, for ready for the supper of the Lamb and the bride of the Lamb. So you're going to have the church and Israel and Judah brought together in time for that in the last 3.5 years. Now, bringing that back to Matthew 24, you have after the abomination, after verse 20, you have, then there shall be great tribulation not seen since the beginning of the world or ever seen again. This is the great tribulation of the world versus the tribulation of the saints that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24:8 with the word affliction. It's the Greek word thalipsis, which can be translated as affliction, tribulation, trouble. It's the cognate Greek word for the Hebrew sarah, for trouble. This is the same timing. It's after the abomination. And for people who don't think that it's translated correctly in Matthew 24:8, then I'd suggest they look at Mark 13:19, because in the parallel verse for this tribulation not seen since the beginning of the world in Matthew 24, it's the same passage, except that it's translated from thalipsis in Mark 13:19 as affliction, and the same as in, the first 3.5 years of the saints' tribulation that matches up with Revelation 7, and the ones that the saints who are martyred in Revelation 6 are going to be waiting for. So you have a persecution of Babylon, and then you have a persecution of the Antichrist as it flows into the last 3.5 years. And then all of this will intersect back into Revelation 12 again, when I was talking about this covenant being annulled with this scourge, this overflowing scourge that is going to sweep people away. With Revelation 12 again, where we had the Exodus, we had the protection of Judea, they're fleeing to the wilderness. Revelation 12:15 says that the serpent will cast out a flood to carry people away or overflow people away, and Judah is fleeing from that, and God stands up and protects Israel at that point in time. So that's, to me, how it all sort of intersects. And when it's talking about a covenant of death, it's a covenant that is leading to begins the last 7 years, which is the fulfillment. And it's the full 7 years. You can't parse this one up. It doesn't say part of it. It's the whole 7 years in Daniel 9:27, where all vision and prophecy is going to be fulfilled. And when Jesus will come and introduce a reign of righteousness, as I'm paraphrasing a couple of verses back, for the 70 weeks set aside for all prophecy to be fulfilled. So that, for me, is the full understanding of the covenant of the death, but it links in and just sort of testifies to a chronology that you can just weave in and put in all sorts of other passages with those markers for chronology, but it begins with putting everything around what Jesus said. And Jesus instructed us to learn about this covenant in Daniel. And then once we understand what Jesus has said, then we're sort of guided to look at what other verses match up with that. And the testimony of Jesus sort of, to me, comes next, which is Revelation. And then I look for Old Testament sort of prophecies that line up. And it's just amazing how they all work in perfection.
Wow. Thank you so much for that thorough answer, Gary. And I wanted to comment too, I really appreciate your knowledge and use of the Hebrew and Greek languages in your work and in your answers here, because it helps it everything come so much more alive when you dig into the original languages, right? And
it does, because it's not that I want to be too critical on the translations, but the English words that are provided don't provide the full context of the meaning that is provided and that was understood in the ancient Hebrew language and for the Greek language. So you get much more of the understanding for the passage. Just be careful that they can have multiple meanings and you can't just put the meaning you want in there, because it has to fit the verse, it has to fit the chapter, and it can't conflict with anything else in the Bible. So you have to be disciplined with that.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I was also going to say, too, it's interesting that you said that, I mean, and I totally agree that like the Bible, because like you said, the Bible always supports itself. If you let it, you don't understand something, keep reading. And I kind of had the same experience with your book, because sometimes I'd get stuck on a chapter and have to pray before I read the chapter. And it's okay, dear God, let me understand this. And then I just keep reading and then look at the references in the back, and your book supports itself as well. So you can tell that, you're definitely a man of the Most High God, and you do very thorough research. So thank you for that, Gary. Speaking of thorough, I was not very thorough. I'm still kind of a newbie at this, and I apologize. I sent you the first 2 questions on that list, but I believe that you answered both of those the last time at the end of the show. And so I think that we'll go ahead, and that list that I sent you, Gary, I think we should start on number 3. Do you agree?
You can start wherever you want.
Okay, I think we'll start with the third one, because we answered the first 2 that I sent you during the last show. So this is the next question we have is from Sean Raziel, and it is, if Eve's punishment was to give birth in pain, would she ever be able to do so without?
So as I understand the question, it's referring to the events of Genesis 3 and the curses for breaking the blessings in the original covenant of Eden, is that Eve would give, and all women to follow would suffer the sorrows and labors of the birth pain. And so it seems to me the question is was she ever able to do without those sorrows? I would say yes to that. We don't get the example in terms of actually having a baby without going through the difficulty of labor pains. But the wording there, I think, suggests that was the case, that when they were going to start to reproduce, if they had followed the law, the only law that was provided as part of the covenant, then they would have been able to produce and multiply with ease, just as the people of day 6 received that blessing. And just as I believe Adam and Eve inherited that blessing with the covenant of Eden. And if people aren't sure what I'm talking about, that I have a document on the differences between day 6 and the Eden account that suggests to me that there's 2 separate creations, and I go through it in terrific detail, and you can see the differences. And I don't believe that the Bible contradicts itself. I understand the Bible adds to more details as it unfolds, but it doesn't contradict itself. And there's a nuance there that one sort of needs to wrestle with. If you're like me, where it says if it's the Word of God, it should fit. It should make some sense. So I think there's two different creations there. And so when Adam is created and has a special spirit breathed into him, that I think was capable for the future resurrections as the ultimate plan for the resolution to the angelic rebellion. We have some other details that come along with that are helpful. And in Genesis 2:24, and Jesus refers back to this, that man shall leave his mother and father to join or cleave to a woman so that they can reproduce and have family. So that this is presupposing that in Genesis 2, just after Eve was created, that she had the ability to recreate by inference. But she doesn't, because it doesn't happen until after they're ostracized. And so when we get into Genesis 5:1-2 and the generations of the Adamites through the Sethian line, and for people who use that as the official start, we actually get that in Genesis 4, I think 26 and 27, where we get Seth and Enos, and that the people of the Sethites are coming back to the Word of God. But chapter 5 gives us the complete genealogies and some interesting information that comes along with this as it's pertinent to the question that Sean asked, and that he inherited the day 6 blessing as it's sort of quoted in there, that thereof that Adam and Eve were going to multiply and also spread across the earth with their descendants by inference. And it's the same wording that's used for the initial blessing that God provided in Genesis 1 with the day 6 people. And that this is a wording that is going to be understood as being blessed as part of that covenant, as Genesis 5 talks about, and it actually says blessed there. So, and then it's the same language that is used for Genesis 9:1, that these blessings of day 6 that Adam inherits, and the covenant within and the promise within for the creation of Adam is going to be passed on to Noah, which is why you get that same language again in Genesis 9:1, where Noah inherited the blessings, and he is blessed to multiply and spread out through the earth just as it was before. So it's a carrying on with those original blessings that's ultimately going to be passed down to Abraham and into a full covenant that we would understand as the Holy Covenant. So the simple answer by that, all the inferences are indicating yes, that she would have, if she had given birth in Eden, and that we know that that was the intent with Genesis 2:24, that she would not have had pain at that point in time. But after breaking the law of eating from the fruit of the tree of good and evil and being deceived by the Nahash serpent, likely guided by Satan, by all implications, because he was, as in Ezekiel 28, in the Garden of Eden, and in the book of Enoch as Gadrael. And this is the cherubic form as opposed to the seraphic form that's in Eden. And he has many forms, including a dragon and a serpent, but that's another rabbit trail. So yeah, the simple answer is yes, and I think we get enough scripture there to substantiate that.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary, for that excellent answer again. I'm going to go on to the next question from Sean Raziel again. What are your views on Masonry-backed ideologies like Blavatsky, JW's Hebrew Israel?
Well, I don't want to be the one that is sitting here and saying other belief systems are all Masonic backed. And I just, for me, it's, you can tell by their fruits as to whether they are or they're not. Polytheist obviously is pretty easy, but it's when you get into versions and sects of Christianity. I may or may not agree with everything that they do, but I like to be careful with that. But there's a distinction with like Blavatsky and Gnosticism and all the polytheist religions. I mean, they are definitely backing polytheist ideology. So we need to be careful as to how this would show up in Christian groups, and whether or not it's one that we would recognize or not. Look for the markers. So if these are going to be masonry-backed ideologies, you're going to see polytheism and secret society imagery in those shrines, in the language, and look for a key way of approaching the Bible, and that's to interpret the Bible, or to reimagine what it said, or to change what it said, as some of these groups would want to do. And that if they are in any way taking authority to say that they can change Scripture and rewrite Scripture in any way, then that isn't consistent within Scripture, and you certainly can't be eliminating Scripture. That's a red flag. But there are other red flags, and it's how you recreate who Jesus is or who God is, and how some groups might say that, well, I believe in the Jesus of the New Testament, not the God of the Old Testament. You can't do that. Jehovah, the pre-existent Jesus, is of the Elohim. That includes the Ruach and El Elyon, the God Most High, or Father, as we would understand it, as Jesus told us to pray to Abba. So when I look at other things that you can look for in these red flags, is that they do a certain amount of other things that is always clear, whether or not it's subtle or it's right in your face. So the first thing that they're trying to do is, with all of these deceptions, and they are always creating doubt and deceptions and conflicts and contradictions to wedge doubt in the faithful. And so the first thing that they're trying to do is lead people away from God. That's why they have to reimagine Scripture. That's why they have to interpret it. That's why they have to discredit Scripture as not being accurate, and why they have to deny Jesus as the Son of God. Because it's the only way it can legitimize what they're doing, and to hopefully, from their perspective, put doubt and lead people away from God. Anything done to slander God is from these Masonic-backed and polytheist organizations. Anything that dismisses God as not being real, and atheism is just a tactic of polytheism to lead people away from God, and evolution is another tactic, because all of the sciences and all the wisdom of the world comes from Sophia, wisdom, and the philosophy, theology, or the love of Sophia, the love of wisdom of Sophia, as the theology behind all of the sciences, just as they were merged as one before the flood, and that they will be merging again in the end time, but with a polytheist agenda and a globalist agenda. So if it dismisses God, does not give God credit for anything, and the slandering of the God, those are red flags. And then the other thing that they're going to do is their worship is going to be in taciturn imagery, taciturn allegories that will surround their buildings, will surround their literature. It will be in their literature, so you can recognize it. So you can recognize polytheist, corrupted segments of Christianity by the fruits, and it's not hard to pick up once you know what they're doing. And they like to invade the leadership level, so not only as ministers but also as the elders in the church. And it's at that elder adept level where they like to make changes to doctrine and do as they will behind closed doors and out of sight.
Wow, I totally agree. They're targeting churches and the leadership in them, especially just as in prophecy, right? The false prophets will rise in the last days to deceive many, the wolves. And also, speaking of who Jesus is, that's our next question. Is Shiloh another name for Jesus? This is from Brian Tucker, and he gives a scripture reference of Genesis 49, verse 9.
Yeah, so anywhere it says Shiloh, it's referring to Jesus. And I know there's another word that's very similar to it as a specific word, but specifically Shiloh. This is an epithet for the Messiah, for our Redeemer, for the Jehovah of the Elohim, or the Logos of Theos. That's the cognitive term, the latter, for Jehovah of Elohim in the Old Testament. And it means he who it is that comes, to which all things belong, by inference to him. So all things belong to him because he's the Word of God. He's the one who created all things at the command of God. And in Genesis 1, where it says God said, that's Elohim Amar. And Elohim is represented by all three there. It can also be understood by some in other applications. I shouldn't say understood by some in other. It can also be understood in other applications as a superlative nature to El Elyon, the God Most High. But the context suggests this is the tripart nature of El, the Father, Jehovah as Amar, the Word, when God spoke. And you also have Ruach, the Spirit, in Revelation 1:2. So they're all there for that creation. And then you see a transference over to that in Genesis 2:4, where it has going from Elohim, after sort of a recap of what was talked about going on in Genesis 1, then you move into the creation of Adam, and that's Lord God, or Jehovah of the Elohim. And so this is who our interaction is with for the most part in the Bible, and it's the pre-existent Jesus. And it derives from another word that's similar, named Shalah, and it means to rest and be at ease and be in peace and be secure. And so part of that original meaning is part of the epithet of the Messiah, Shiloh. And so, yes, when you're reading of Shiloh, when he comes, you are reading a prophecy for the coming of the Redeemer.
Awesome answer, Gary. And I see in the chat, Brian Tucker, who asked you the question, named his cat Shiloh. So I think it's a really cool name, and that's actually a great explanation. I always wondered what that connection was. So thank you for making that clear. Next question is from Rock A. Shepherd. Was the 10% tithe a tax for Israel's priest? What is a free gift offering? So it's kind of like two questions there.
Yeah, could you just run that question by me one more time in terms of what he's asking for about the tithing?
Sure. Was the 10% tithe a tax for Israel's priest? And then the second part is, what is a free gift offering?
So when we look at let me just think about this for a second. So when we look at the tithing, this is I wouldn't call it a tax. But what I would talk about it is a supplement for a specific tribe, and in this case, priests of God, the Levites, that they have no ability for having income. And so for a provision for that, is the tithing. And the tithing is very much restricted to a set of rules. And so when we look at the tithing as it was done in the nation of priests with Israel, it was designed to give 10% of the produce from the land and the grain of the fruit, and the grain or the fruit. And it was for the needy, and it was for the priests. And this is a tithing that goes to the Levites mostly to live off of, as they have no inheritance. So the only tribe that didn't receive an inheritance, and their objective was to serve God and to provide his knowledge and explain their knowledge in the worship of the God Most High. And so one wants to be careful as to how tithing is used today in terms of what that means in terms of what they're asking for as in money. And so one wants to be fairly careful with understanding of what the tithing is for. But it was specifically for the priests, and the priests would give some to the needy as required as well. And the other thing that the Israelites would do is that they wouldn't harvest right to the edge of the field so that the poor could come along and gather some of the food themselves. So when the second question, as I understand it, is asking about what a free gift offering is. And it is sort of understood as a gift of a divine grace and favor with one receives without a merit of his own. And one, again, I think one wants to be kind of careful with free gift, because the translation is kind of lost in kind of the modern language. So, and so in Romans 5:15, it talks about this free gift for if through the offense one may be dead, much more the grace that God is going to provide is sort of being understood here. But the free gift, you have to be, you have to have a favor which one receives without any merit. So this is something that is done, I think, for a believer. That is done for a special gift, and I think that gift is a reference to the gift of life and the gift of eternal life through faith, even though we've not earned that based on our sin and based on the law. And only through the grace of God is that free gift available through our faith and through our loyalty to God. So I think that's what is the free gift offering is talking about.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary, for that. Next question. We're very close to break. We're about 5 minutes in. I'm going to still ask this question, but if we need to stop and continue after break, we can do so. When did the Jews stop saying the name the way it is written? This is from Michael Smelzer.
Yeah, another really good question. So it's really kind of interesting if you kind of think about a larger context here, is that in the time of Moses and in the time of the Exodus and the conquest of the covenant land, Moses is provide the first parts of the Old Testament and the Torah. And so he's being given it even as parts of the Torah is being written. And so within that, particularly, let's say within Genesis, this is obviously knowledge that is coming down circa 14 to 1500 BC to the Israelites from what happened before the flood. And so in that, we're going to get Ruach, we're going to get El, Elohim, El Elyon, and Jehovah, or the old Yahweh tetragram that it was originally sort of pronounced as and spelt without vowels. That is later changed to Jehovah with the W going to a V sound downstream. And so to me, I can't imagine that when this knowledge was being provided through Moses and the priests, when they're talking to the Israelites, that they weren't using the words that they were given. It's like an extension of a policy that is man-made that is kind of not really in the Bible. We were given these words. We'll come back and answer it later, I guess.
Good. We're at break. We'll see you guys as soon as it's over.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
I love motherhood more than I could have ever imagined. One of the most important things to me is nurturing a strong foundation in Yahusha's character in our children. That said, I made sheets that went over the fruits of the Spirit, the armor of God, the 10 Commandments, and creation days. Each day at breakfast, we would go over these and then read books like Cat in the Hat that just felt so void in meaning, but they loved the rhymes. I looked everywhere for rhyming biblical principles and couldn't find any. That's when I decided I would make them myself. Praise God, we now have our first book, Eliana and Ezra's Journey Through the Fruits of the Spirit, a first in a series. Every morning we now can continue to build strong principles even through rhymes, and I wanted to offer it to the babies in your life too. Please go to Sacred Word Publishing and search Fruits of the Spirit to get your copy, or you can go to prophecyforchildren.com. Thank you so much.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back, everyone. Break. This is Lisa George. I'm here with author and researcher Gary Wayne, and we're continuing the questions here today with Ask Me Anything. If you have any questions for Gary, please put them in the chat here on YouTube in all caps so that I can see them. But we will continue moving on with the next question. Gary, are you there?
I am.
Okay, next question. This is from Jason Nail. Were there 70? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to the last question about when did the Jews stop saying the name the way it was written?
I do. I was getting so wordy in my answer that I forgot about the time and the cutoff for the commercial break. So, yeah. So I wanted to lay the context down where it makes sense to me that originally the language was using the words that we have in Hebrew today. But after the violations to the Holy Covenant, after the dispersion into the world and the lost tribes with the Assyrian apocalypse in about 721 BC, and then again after the apocalypse of the southern kingdom in about 589 BC, and after that exile, that's when we start to see a movement from what I found in historical records and it's not clear exactly when or how or why, the idea that it was not proper to say the name of the God Most High as it was given to them came in, because we don't get that in the Bible, that you can't, anywhere that I found that you can't use El and El Elyon and Jehovah and Ruach and Elohim. So somewhere between the return from Babylon and about 300 BC, this becomes formalized, and it could be that they felt that they were maybe unworthy after violating the covenants. But they decided that they would not say those names. And so it seems to be a man-made discipline within the Bible. And I'll let people decide whether or not they think that's a good idea or a bad idea. But that seems to be sort of how it came about. And so that tradition continues into the Bibles that we have today, where you're going to get God for Elohim, for example, or you're going to get Lord God for Jehovah of the Elohim. And they came about that by the use of another Hebrew word, H113 in the Strong's lexicon, as Adonai or Adon. Adon means Lord, and the A at the end turns it into my Lord as an understanding. And so that wording is used over 400 times in the Old Testament, sometimes for master, but also for Lord, and sometimes referring to God and or Jehovah. And so that terminology was attributed to Jehovah and Jehovah of the Elohim, as it would have originally and still does show up in Hebrew, to prevent from saying those words. And so we see this show up in polytheism as well. So I wonder whether or not there is a Babylon influence, just as you had Kabbalism start up within the Jewish sect that begins with the Eastern exile. Now, you also had polytheists within the community of the Essenes, and I have a great document on that, and that covers different material that's in the book. If people want to get a hold of me on that, I'll send you the document. But they were polytheists as well, but from Egypt. So this sort of enters in with the return from exile and with maybe part of that sort of influence. And so you'll see the name Adonai is the name that Gnostics and secret societies and other polytheist organizations that are related will use for the God of the Bible. So if you hear like Pike speaking or read about what Spiking is saying, they're going to use the word Adonai. So I'm not a fan of that substitution because it substitutes my Lord like 6,000 times for Jehovah in the Old Testament. So I'm not a fan of that. I understand that. But I think that's when it started. And it seemed to be sort of a realization or an ideology that it would be improper to say the name of God. I would say this to that, though, and again, everybody needs to decide on this for themselves. The name of God, or the name of the Word of God, we don't know. And if we did, we wouldn't understand it and we couldn't pronounce it. It would be beyond us. This is wording that's provided for our level of understanding to represent who the tripart nature of God is, and that it is not his actual name or in sort of any sort of way. It might be a description, you could say that, but I wouldn't say it's the name of God. But that's just my opinion on it.
Thank you, Gary, for that very thorough answer. And I agree, I'm not really a fan of the substitution name Adonai either, instead of the Yod He Vav He sort of acronym we get in Hebrew, right? Let's see, next question from Jason Nail. Were there 77 books in the original Bible?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I'm thinking where Jason is asking that question from, as I think about it, is that it's not necessarily with the assembling of books as we understand it today, or what was done, in the time of the formation of the Roman Church, when they were collecting all of the documents. So typically in the testaments that we read today, you have 29 books in the Old Testament and 29 in the New Testament, 39 in the Old Testament. It gives us 66 books. But in the original printing of the KJV, there was additional books that were included, the Apocrypha. And where it really starts to get confusing is that if you dig into it, there's several different numbers. 77 would include that as well, but some say there was only 7 books of the Apocrypha, and others say there was 11, as in this case for the number 77, and you can even take it up to 19 books and to 85 in total. So I think it all comes down to how they classify some of the Apocrypha as not being like you have First Ezra and Second Ezra as part of the Apocrypha, and that may be classified as one. Or in the Maccabees, you may have 1 and 2, but there's also 3 and 4. Is that classified as 1 or 2? And so on and so forth in terms of why those numbers move around a little bit. I have 2 copies of in modern language of the Apocrypha attached to the Bible, and I recommend it. Understand if it's it was labeled as apocrypha, so there may be some verification issues, or do they have an old enough source document that may have gone into why they classified as apocrypha? But it's all very good reading. The ones I really like are Baruch. I like Bel and the Dragon. I like First and Second Ezra. I like the Maccabees for that in-between history. At least we get some of that for what was going on after the exile. I also like Sirach, and I also like Wisdom of Solomon. I really like the Wisdom of Solomon. Percent rule, consistent with. That's usually the telltale sign.
Okay, Gary, you're cutting out just a little bit on and off there. I'm not sure if it's something with your mic or if it's just the technology in general. Can you still hear me?
I'm still here. Are you still there?
Okay. Yes, I'm still here. Okay. Just little parts of your last answer was cut out, but I love Second Esdras as well, and Baruch and the apocryphal books. It seems like most of them, or if not all of them, have been taken out. Are you? You're still cutting out just a bit, Gary. Can you say something else there? I can't really hear you.
Yeah, I can. I can reconnect if you like. I'm showing good uploads, so not sure why it's breaking up, but I can click out here and click back in a minute. How's that? And we'll get try and get a better connection. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good, because I don't want anyone to miss any of the important things you're saying, and it's a little bit choppy here on this end. I don't see anyone in the chat complaining about it, but maybe that might help if you want to. I'm not a technology person, but if you want to try to do that, that would be great. And we can continue going on to your next question. Thank you again for that awesome answer about the 77 books. Okay, all right, and you're reconnected?
I am.
Okay, there we go. Yes, that's actually a lot clearer. Thank you so much, Gary. All right, are you ready for our next question?
I am.
Okay, this is from Rock Shepherd, and this is another, instead of one question, it's sort of two, so I'll read it very slowly. He's asking, did the earth become void, or was it created that way on the first day? That's the first part. And the second part that kind of goes along with it was, did Satan live on earth prior to creation?
I would presume the second question is based on the first question. So I'll try and answer that so it's not out of sorts with the second question. So I think it's one of those really important questions for Christians and it's right there with, not as much so, but it's close second to me as to the differences in the creation in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. That really sort of brings things into context. And I'm not as doctrinal on the gap theory as is what is being referred to here. But I think it would answer a lot of questions, and I think it would fit a lot of the passages better, and passages that come later in the Bible. And you could do, and I did, a 3-hour presentation on this at a conference. So I promise I won't do that tonight, but I will answer the question. Go ahead.
No, I'm just exclaiming like, wow, 3 hours. Okay, continue.
Yeah, there's a lot of details. So the first thing that you want to look at when you're looking at the KJV, where it has the word "and," that word's inserted, but it's done there by translators, and that sort of gives you an indication that there's a pause going on, and that it presents sort of the next sequence sort of going forward of the set of events. So keep that sort of in mind. And one of the interesting things is with the New International Version is that where it has the word and at the beginning. It actually says, and the earth was without form and void. It says now the earth was formless and void. And that's interesting. And the footnote on it says it could be translated as was or became. And that's a very interesting sort of concept in Genesis 1:2 is that now the earth became, void and formless, or the standard sort of translation. So like, how do they get there? So how that gets there is just sort of quickly on this is that word was is haya in Hebrew, and it can mean to exist, and it's actually the root word for the great I am, Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahweh. I have trouble with the pronouncing of the Yahweh, and I always butcher it. So I used to go with the standard pronunciation of Jehovah. If anybody wonders why I do it that way, I don't like to screw it up. And it means to exist or to come to pass or come into being. So when you're looking at that passage, that understanding of how the passage could be translated becomes very, very important. And then the words in behind it just as important, because everything needs to fit. And so it says, and the earth was, or the earth became without form and void. And if it became, that suggests history that was before. And the two key words here for the understanding is form and void. And form is the word tuhu, and it means desolation, a desert, chaos, worthless. And something's not created as a desolation. It becomes a desolation. It isn't created as a desert. It becomes a desert. It's not created as chaos. It becomes chaotic. It doesn't become it isn't created worthless. It becomes worthless. So from that aspect, form tuhu sounds like a destruction that might have happened. And void is buhu, which means ruin, waste, empty, vacuity, void. Again, all words that suggest that it became as opposed to was. And how do we know that it likely wasn't created as destruction? Because God is perfect. He creates everything whole. He creates everything to be lived in. And in Isaiah 45, where it talks about God and creation, it says that God did not create in vain, but to be inhabited. That word vain is tuhu. And that suggests, along with a whole bunch of other passages, that you could translate that the earth differently than was without form, that it became without form. And to me, that better fits where the angelic rebellion might be. And it better fits Psalms 104, where it gives a recap of things in creation, as in 104:4, where the angels are created. We know they're created before the physical creation, because in Job 38, you have 4 through 7, you have the morning stars and the sons of God. These are angels who are celebrating at the creation, and that they're created before the physical world creation. And in passage 5, you have in 104, Psalms 104, you have the foundations of the earth were laid, that will never be destroyed. So you can destroy the earth, but you can't destroy its foundations. And in 6, it says the earth was covered with water. And the earth in verse 30 is renewed when? When God sends his spirit, the earth is renewed. Just as Ruach, the spirit, is hovering over the darkness and the waters, and that darkness is a secret place, a darkness place, an obscure place, a place physically of misery and destruction and sorrow and wickedness, and a place overseen and ruled over by the dark lord Satan. That was not part of the meaning. That's my inference to it. And it also makes a better understanding that in 2 Peter in the New Testament, in chapter 3, 4 through 5, where it says the heavens of the old, where the earth was standing out of the water and in the water, and whereby the earth was overflowed with the water, perished. So there was this flood of water that killed the earth. And most people think that's the flood, except the whole earth wasn't destroyed. Just the earth was destroyed, not the sea, all the animals, and the whole earth didn't die. And that it starts to make sense out of that if this water collapsed in that destroyed the original earth down to the foundations, and there was nothing but chaos that was left, that if you were going to renew the earth, as Psalms 104 talks about, you would create a firmament where the earth could resurface, and that you could sustain life within that firmament with all of the heavenly bodies that you need in there to make that work. And that's the separation of the waters that had originally collapsed. And now all of a sudden, everything starts to make more sense, that you have this rebellion between Genesis 1:1 and 2. And in that rebellion, they use all sorts of angelic technology and weapons, and the earth is destroyed. And it's the same thing that's going to happen in the end time. So that when you get into further on in the second Peter, that this is the world that was destroyed in the beginning, by fire, and will be again and reserved to be destroyed by fire in the end time. But yet the flood isn't the apocalypse of the end time. It's a separate apocalypse. So you have a destruction by fire in the beginning. And that's the cognate word that's being used there in Greek. It is for the beginning in Genesis 1:1. And everything starts to point directionally that we have an older earth. Now, I'm fine with a 6-day creation and nothing before, but it just seems to me, and that and a whole bunch of other passages, that you could make a very good argument to translate that the earth was, not was, but became void and formless, and that Satan lived on the earth prior to the creation in days 1 through 6, because he ruled over that earth with the fallen angels, just as he continues to rule with the renewed earth, and they're trying to destroy this earth as well, and which is why in Hinduism, you have the dance of Shiva and Shiva's, connection to CERN and all of the destroyer gods. The doctrine there is that you can only renew things and have it rise out of, and in this case, the earth, and have it rise out of the ashes like a phoenix. So you have to destroy things first to get a renewal. That's the polytheist form. So God's not going to let that happen. We're going to see a lot of destruction, but that's not going to happen. And it fits well perfectly, even with Exodus 20, where it says that God, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And heavens of old, that's talked about in Exodus 20, is the firmament. And we know that because in Genesis 1:15, it says the firmament of heaven, and that the firmament is heaven. And so this is referring to the 6 days of creation when the heavens were created, and it's the firmament heaven. So heaven is the Hebrew word Shema, which is, or Shemayim, which is the plural form of Shema, and Shema singular form is not used, so it's always in the plural form in the Old Testament. And that heaven, Shemaim, can mean three different heavens. It can mean the firmament as one, so from the sun in, the sun would be within the firmament, as is described in Genesis 1, and what's outside the firmament for the rest of the universe and the physical universe. And then the third one is where God lives. So the heaven in polytheism is in Sheol and Hades, where their gods rule from. And that's in that darkness, and that's within another dimension within the earth, as I would understand that. So, yeah, I think Satan did live upon the earth prior to the sixth-day creation, and he ruled over the earth after he rebelled, and I think took that into complete destruction within that rebellion as well. And then you have the renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104 describes Genesis 1.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary, for that very thorough answer. Also, too, I wanted to note, Zen has several books just really going into a lot of detail, just like what you just did about that whole things that happened before, or actually between Genesis 1 verse 1 and 1 verse 2, like what you just described. Also, too, I like your description using the phoenix imagery of how that's something that they use, the destruction and renewal in the New World Order, right? It's very similar. It reminds me of what they did here several months ago here in Maui, where they destroyed everything. They're going to renew it and make it like this smart city is what the plan is. I don't know if you are aware of that.
No, but it makes perfect sense. And that's why they have no qualms in order to bring about their new age, their new millennium, that they need to destroy this world first. It just, and they actually believe that.
Yeah, it seems like a horrible form of mental illness to me to think like that, but we have to kind of know how they think so that we can know how to fight our enemy, right? We need to know their tactics, right?
Exactly.
Okay, ready for the next question. This is from Jason Nail. Is the star of Moloch the mark of Cain?
I would probably say no to that. I think there's a lot of different ways you might understand the mark of Cain, but I don't think it would be the star of Moloch. But so let me walk through this. So, a star can be a six-pointed star, five-pointed stars in the pentagram, six-pointed as in the Star of David. Both of those are kind of occult imagery. And so, yeah, in one aspect, you could say that would be a perfect mark if that was related to polytheism and to specific gods, and likely to Satan in particular. I think there's a lot of good theories on what that mark of the beast was. It might be things like, some sort of dragon within a circle, as the Rosicrucians like to believe. It might be pale white skin as that mark, as some Apocrypha likes to talk about. And I think that shows up in the book of Lamech of Cain for people who might be interested in. Found that rather interesting that might be a possible mark. So, but let's dig a little bit deeper into this. A star can also mean an angel, just as a fallen angel like Molech would be considered a star. A star is also, a heavenly body. That stars are that angels, fallen and loyal, likely, have one that was named after them. And star is an allegory as it's used in terms of angels in the Bible, whether it's in the New Testament or the Old Testament. Just as I quoted, Job 38, 4 through 7 with the morning stars, or that Daniel 8:10 would have stars being brought down out of heaven at the time of when we're talking about that war in heaven when Antichrist takes power at the midpoint where he's going to trample on a couple of the heavenly hosts. So we know a star is also an allegory and used in the same reference as in the host of heaven, sons of God, and angels are all used together and create a circular sort of meaning for these angelic beings. But is it actually the mark of Cain? Well, let's take a little bit of time and understand who Molech is. From the New Testament, we understand that in Acts 7:43, you have the temple of Moloch, which has the star Remphan. So the star would be, likely the Remphan star, which is, probably an angel in that sort of understanding, but also we would have a representation, whether it's a pentagram or a six-sided star or whatever the imagery might be, and that Moloch is a fallen angel or a god. And we might know Moloch in the Old Testament by, I won't name them all, but they're like Milcom, Micom, Melcam, and Moloch, to name a few, and there's a few other ones. And this was also a god that was worshipped in Babylon. And so some of this imagery probably comes back through the Babylon exile as well. And Moloch is part of the Baalim. And Moloch is mentioned in several passages, but 32:35 is it's a god of fire sacrifices. So they would sacrifice people, and people have to walk through the fire in these rituals. And so this is one of the Baalim gods that ruled after the flood on Mount Hermon, as opposed to the parent gods. And so Baal is the son of El, and the ones who immediately after the flood ruled from the council of the gods. They would have been replaced after the offspring gods who took over from the parent gods went to the pit prison for the same crimes that their parents did. And in the understanding of that word Moloch, it's synonymous with Malak for angel and synonymous with Melech for king. Again, and they're kind of used interchangeably as king and angels and gods as you get particularly into the Ugaritic texts. And so he would have been Baal Malaku of the Ugaritic texts. So one of the Baalim gods. And probably this god is, as you take that back into the meaning of Remphan and Moloch, you have a word that it's linked with in the Old Testament with this Kijun, or Kiyun perhaps, which was either believed in some camps as an Egyptian idol and others a Mesopotamian idol, and the god representing Saturn. So it would be part of the 7 wandering stars and that sort of understanding, and a very, very powerful god that would be grouped in all of the occult pantheons. And this is the same god that is equated with Adremelech of Seraphim, and it was a god of the Amalekim, and a god that the Avim also worshipped. And so this seems to be from that Mesopotamian version, because that worship was in Mesopotamia, with the latter with the Avim and the Adremelech. And the Amalekim and the Avim have pockets where they're in the covenant land and they're also in the east. I'll cover this off in the new book, so look forward to reading that. And finally, Remphan means sort of shrunken and lifeless. So it's kind of like a dead idol as opposed to a teraphim, a live talking idol. that's being talked about in Acts 7:43. So could it be the mark of Saturn, which some people would equate with Satan, and a lot of people do? Yeah, then you could say that, well, that makes perfect sense, that Cain would have the mark of Satan, except that Satan is above the 7 wandering stars that Saturn is part of. And the authority and the positions are reflective of the one who sits above the council of the gods, who likes to be the counterfeit God on earth of the real council of God in heaven and in the mountain in heaven. It's so I would say probably not, but you know what? There's some good reasoning that might actually be a case, but I just don't think it lines up well enough to be the mark of Cain.
Thank you again, Gary. I have a quick comment. Speaking of Moloch, I did kind of a deep dive on Leviticus 18, verse 21, and other verses in the Old Testament that describe the sacrifice to Moloch. And I looked up the word abar, which is number 5674 in the Strongs. And in the King James, it has, do not let any of your seed pass through, and then the fire is in parentheses. So that kind of made me wonder. So I looked up this word, and it means to alter, to bring over, to carry over, to transition, to cross over, as in gender. And so in that particular word of abar, it's not really pertaining to fire in that verse. And so it makes me kind of wonder if that's similar to what we're seeing a lot of today with the whole transitioning of gender, and if that was part of the meaning of do not let your children pass through to Moloch, or to offer them to Moloch, if that could have something to do with it, maybe.
Certainly, that could certainly be a possibility. And you would think that the fallen angels would have technology to be able to do that and be part of a sort of a idolatry representing their dual sort of nature, where they could be male or female or both. They could choose that sort of form. Another way you could sort of look at that passage as well might be as it's used in the form of death, as it's used in the book of Job, and also in crossing over into death, as into Sheol or to Hades or to another dimension, as it's understood in polytheism, and also the travelers or the passengers in Ezekiel 38 goes back to the Hebrew word abar as well. And so I wonder whether or not this ritual has an ability to take you into a portal and into the other side, perhaps into death, but still over to the other side. It's interesting when you look at the possibilities of some of those words and meanings, and how do they fit? But particularly the association with death, intrigues me. And then the passage in Ezekiel 39 after the slaughter of the Gog army.
All right, thank you so much, Gary. We are now finished with the questions that were submitted from last week. So I'm going to start going into the questions that have been today in the YouTube chat in the live stream. Thank you guys so much for submitting your questions. So we're going to get through as many as possible here today, and then the ones that we cannot cover due to time restraints, we have about 20 minutes left. We're going to continue next month with Brother Gary doing another awesome AMA again. So we'll start with a question from Tiffany Rose. Do you believe in the rapture?
I most certainly do. We certainly get passages, on the rapture. And, the one that I like best comes in, the book of Mark, when, and with the time of the coming of the sign of Jesus. And most people who are saying that rapture doesn't happen, or that they want to look at a different timing for the rapture. They kind of ignore Mark's version of what Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. And when I talked about that, I like to overlay Mark and Luke onto it, onto the book of Matthew as the template. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So in the second coming, it says that, and then I'll just read Mark here, Mark 13:27. It says, and then shall he send his angels, and shall, oops, kind of lost that. So I'm going to have to do that from memory. But he's going to take his, I don't know why my computer's screwing up, but it's screwed up. Sorry about that. But he's going to collect his elect from the ends of the earth and take them to heaven. And so I won't go through all the other passages that follow in other passages, but literally, those angels are going to collect them from the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. And I can't think of anything more clear about what the rapture talks about. I have some documents on rapture if people want it, and how we understand, even though the word rapture isn't in the Bible, I have a document on how we arrive at that understanding through Latin and into English. And it's got to do with harpazo and a few other words and passages that all connect together to form that understanding of rapture. So yes, I do. And I tend to follow the timing of what Jesus said.
Thank you so much, Gary. That verse you were quoting, it was awesome. You memorized it very well. I was just going to read it for everyone to hear. Mark 13, verse 27. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. This is KJV, so it's a little bit different wording, but awesome. You memorized that. And also, I wanted to comment, oh my goodness, when I first read through your book in 2017, I was just going along my merry way, and I get to chapter 52, the rapture tragedy, because Noble and I used to teach dispensationalism, okay? And we used to teach the pre-trib rapture very heavily. And I got to that chapter and I looked at Noble. I said, I can't read this right now. I need to pray first. So thank you so much to waking us up to that whole timing and everything. And you were very instrumental in having us rethink our theology on that. So I really appreciate you, Gary.
Terrific. And again, it's, the idea is, we know rapture is going to happen. I take some issues when people say it's not in the Bible, because it's just, there's a lot of passages on it. But it's going to happen, whenever it happens. And I generally tell people, instruct people for the timing is pray for pre-trib, but prepare for after the abomination.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary. Yes, that's very good advice. All right, this is from Michelle. Have you ever read A Second Witness to, I think she's talking about the Book of Esther, the story of Queen Esther and Mordecai, were they infiltrated by the Canaanites as far as the whole book is concerned?
A parallel passage that the royal seed was corrupted? Do you think that's what she's asking?
I think her question is more pertaining to, is there any other witnesses in the Bible that refer to the book of Esther and the whole story of Esther and Mordecai?
Yeah, not from the top of my head, but I'd have to do some cross-referencing on that. But I don't believe I've read that in the Bible as a second testimony.
Okay, thank you.
What are your thoughts, Lisa?
Well, I've recently done kind of a study on that, and I haven't found any. There's other books in the Bible that there's no other books in the Bible that quote from that book. There's no back and forth like you see with all the other books in the Bible. And the book of Esther was the only book from the Old Testament not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's another kind of a red flag for me. And also in Persian history, there was no record of any of that ever happening with the king, with the beauty pageant, that whole 9 yards. So I am kind of questioning the book's validity in the Bible as well. It also does not mention the name of God, so that's another kind of red flag for me.
Yeah, there is, and I can't remember what was on it. There is part of the Apocrypha that we talked about earlier that was part of the KJV. It has the additions to Esther, but I can't remember what it says in that book. So I'd have to dig in some deeper on it. So, and then you also have, that's about all that I'm aware of for other Esther books.
Okay, all right. Next question. This is from Daniel Sullivan. Would you please discuss the events of Daniel 12? And then there's several parts here. So the events of Daniel 12 is the end of verse 1, the rapture, and who are those blessed for 1,335 days in verse 12?
Okay, good question for sure. And, in sort of replacement kind of theology, people like to look at Daniel 12 and make that a Christian prophecy. This is for Daniel's people. And just as Michael is the warrior for Daniel's people who fights against the beast empires from bringing about the Antichrist, we need to sort of read this in context. And one of those rules that I like to apply prophecy of the Old Testament to the tribes that they're assigned to. And this is going to be for sure with Judah, but it also refers to as the people is Michael fought for the northern kingdom as well. And so this is all of Israel. And so when it says that there is going to be people delivered, in the end time, and the names of the people written in the book of life, many of them that sleep in the earth, and some are going to awake to life and everlasting judgment, contempt. So in the rapture, it's just the ones that on faith who are still alive that are going to be taken. And there's a resurrection sequence in the end time. This is referring to one of the resurrection sequences, but not to the church, not to the Gentiles. This is a resurrection sequence that happens after the rapture, in my understanding of it, and it's in the time of trouble, in the time of excuse me, in the time of Jacob's trouble, that Jacob will be saved out of, at the time of the second Exodus, in the time of the year of the Lord's favor, when the Israelites are going to be broken out and they're out of prisons. And in the last 3.5 years, by the definitions we talked about earlier, with the word trouble as being sarah, tribulation, persecution, and a cognate to the Greek word thlipsis for tribulation and persecution, and the great tribulation that happens after the abomination. So again, all the timing lines up there again, as we talked about earlier. But it lines up with that mysterious prophecy in Ezekiel 37 in the valley of the dry bones. This is the resurrection that's being referred to of Israel and Judah, and they're going to be judged at that time. It's part of the resurrection sequence in preparation for preparing the bride at the supper of the Lamb. And that this happens in the sequence of the narrative just before the second Exodus. So I think this takes a little bit of time. And then at some time later, as you get into the teens in Ezekiel 37, you get that second Exodus coming back to meet Judea, who's been protected in the wilderness. And so Daniel 1 is a Israelite Holy Covenant reference and passage. And just as it was written in the Holy Covenant that if they've kept the covenant, history would happen through the blessings of the covenant. And if they violated the covenant, and eventually both did to a level where they were punished through the curses of the covenant, history is being played out through those curses. And that within those curses, even though they would be hardened the heart, as Romans talks about the Judeans, and lost into the world, as the Old Testament talks about Israel. Israel will be awakened and called by name in the end time for that Exodus. And this is the time of the gathering of Israel in the time of trouble. That happens in the second half. And so this is completely in my opinion, is a completely Israel and Judah prophecy, but it just ties up those loose ends of the Holy Covenant. And that within the Holy Covenant, as part of the curses, it has the details where he will remember them, and in the end time, he will bring them back and bring them back into the covenant.
Okay, thank you so much again, Gary. We're getting very close to the end of the show, but I think you might be able to answer this question kind of quickly. This is from Annie O 100. Is Donald Trump a bad Don? I think that's like a little play on words there. A bad Don. The destroyer warp speed.
If I understood the question, is Donald Trump a bad one?
Yes, I think that's what she's asking.
Well, to me, a human is not probably going to be a bad one. And you could be given authority by Abaddon, or be an avatar of the avatar Abaddon. Abaddon and Apollyon, as that shows up in Revelation 9, both means destroyer. And this is the leader of the angels that come out and the demons that come out of the abyss just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. So this is likely not a demon, and because it is the leader, and that leader would be a fallen angel. And in the book of Enoch, we understand that as being Azazel, as the leader of the host who was put into the pit prison or the abyss prison. And so I would say no, but also Antichrist is known as the son of perdition. And perdition, as you go take that back into Greek, it comes out of the same words as Apollyon does, or perdition does. And it is akin to being, when you say son of perdition, as being related to Azazel, perhaps. So maybe there's a possession that would go on there, or maybe this is a bloodline, or maybe both. But in either case, I don't think Trump is an Antichrist figure, and I don't think that he is a fallen angel. I think that his age doesn't fit, and that I also think that his position and the power that he's going to be able to achieve isn't going to fit as well. I think there's too many things yet to happen. And I think if it's a bloodline Antichrist, it'll come out of the royal bloodlines. And there's probably some bloodlines within Trump, but they're so far diluted that I don't think he would be the one that would rise to Antichrist level.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm going to still ask this question, and if you're not able to answer the whole thing, we can continue on next month. Or what do you think, Gary?
Sure.
Okay. It's a little bit lengthy question, but I think you can answer it kind of quickly like you did the last one. This is, okay, does Gary think that the origin of racism may stem from the Nephilim being blonde hair, blue-eyed, red hair, hazel eyes, an attempt to glorify themselves? Could this be the spirit behind racism?
I would raise it to a larger level, and I'll talk about this in the new book, that there's also the dark-haired, pale-skinned giants, and so Gilgamesh is from that branch, and you could look at Nimrod being depicted in the same sort of way. But it is a racist idea in the understanding that this is a different race, even though it's part from humans, part from fallen angels. But they look at themselves as a superior race. And they also look at themselves with superior ideology and theology. And it's all of that. And then it's utilized for racial purposes as they need to.